Well, after all the hype, the American TV network CBS has broadcast its interview with the Egyptian president. Remember, this was the one Cairo had asked not to be aired. Abdel Fattah el-Sisi told 60 Minutes his country's forces were closely cooperating with the Israeli military, and he also denied human rights abuses in Egypt. Diane Estabrook has the story.
U.S. television network CBS said the Egyptian government demanded it not air an interview with journalist Scott Pelley, in which Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi said his government and Israel are cooperating in the fight against the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant.
Would you say that this is the deepest and closest cooperation that you've ever had with Israel?
That is correct. The Air Force sometimes needs to cross to the Israeli side, and that's why we have a wide range of coordination with the Israelis.
It's been estimated there are about 1,000 terrorists in Sinai. With more than $1 billion in U.S. military aid every year, why haven't you wiped them out?
And why hasn't the U.S. eliminated the terrorists in Afghanistan after 17 years and spending $1 trillion?
El-Sisi's comments could inflame public opinion in his country, which regards the Jewish state as an occupier of Arab lands. The two countries have a 40-year-old peace treaty and diplomatic relations. But despite that, many Egyptians still think of Israel as the traditional enemy. Last year, Egypt's military denied press reports that it was cooperating with Israel to root out ISIL-affiliated fighting groups in the mountainous Sinai region bordering the two countries.
It's been estimated
Pelley also questioned el-Sisi about a Human Rights Watch report that claims Egypt is detaining 60,000 political prisoners, many of whom belong to the Muslim Brotherhood, the political party el-Sisi outlawed.
I don't know where they got that figure. I said there are no political prisoners in Egypt. Whenever there is a minority trying to impose their extremist ideology, we have to intervene regardless of their numbers.
El-Sisi claimed any extremists that were being held would receive a fair trial, a contradiction for rights activists who say many are in prison and face long detentions. CBS says the interview with the Egyptian president was taped a few months ago, but didn't say why it had been held until Sunday. Diane Estabrook, Al Jazeera.
And so this whole story about the interview, rather than its content, it became very big. And it was interesting to hear in this online clip from 60 Minutes correspondent Scott Pelley and his producer Rachel Morehouse what went on behind the scenes and what they, as journalists, made of it all. Have a look.
Is it fair to say the government of Egypt pressured 60 Minutes not to air this interview?
They tried to,
well,
absolutely.
They asked us that directly.
The interview took place at 8 o'clock at night at the Palace Hotel in New York, and by the time I got home, my contact at the embassy sent me an email. It says, "We are formally requesting that the interview not be aired."
Yes.
Did they have any sense of what the questions might be before the interview?
Well, they wanted all of the questions in writing before the interview. I had a back and forth with them, I would say, for about a month, saying, absolutely not. We can't do this. This is not the way we work at 60 Minutes.
As a viewer, when you're watching the interview, you think, did he know what 60 Minutes is before he agreed to do this?
Well, that was what I wondered, too. His record on human rights, as chronicled by the United Nations and the U.S. State Department, is absolutely dreadful. Did you give that order?
Allow me to ask you a question. Are you closely following the situation in Egypt? From where do you get your information?
How he might have decided to sit down with us and imagine that those questions weren't going to come up, I do not know.
Really interesting, isn't it? We've got Amr Magdi with us now to talk about this Middle East, North Africa researcher with Human Rights Watch. I believe also a contributor to that interview. It was a lot of your Human Rights Watch research, Amr, which was quoted by Scott Pelley towards President Sisi. What did you make of his responses?
Right. Well, his responses were laughable attempts that fool no one to conceal the truth about human rights abuses, that some of them actually might amount to crimes against humanity. that he himself supervised.
The whole idea of actually pulling the interview, though, that is very dramatic, I think, for any leader who grants an interview with a big network or a big show like 60 Minutes. He obviously, or his aides obviously thought, well, this isn't going to look good for us.
Yeah, I think since President Sisi's government is controlling media in Egypt very tightly, and there is no room anymore for any free speech under his rule, the only space or place where he can be actually scrutinized or asked the right questions is the international media. But I think for him, as a military dictator, it's important also to speak to international media. It's a stage where he can speak before the whole world. And perhaps, as journalist Scott Perry explained, he actually did not expect much critical questions. And maybe it's the first time ever he came to an interview without actually having the set of questions that he would be asked before coming to the interview.
Yeah, not something we do in this industry. Tell us more, though, Amr, about the reality of human rights on the ground in Egypt, the types of figures and statistics which you provided and which were refuted, I guess, by the president. How bad is it?
Right. Yeah, I would like to start with the Rabaa massacre that he supervised, he oversaw as a Minister of Defense in August 2013. President Sisi in the interview said that the police, or that the reason why they killed hundreds of people in a few hours is that there were thousands of armed people in the protest. But actually, his statements are laughable and funny because it contradicts his own government statements. The government, just after the dispersal of the Rabaa sit-in, said that they seized 16 weapons. And then several years later, in unfair mass trial of 730 people or more, survivors of the Rabaa dispersal, the authorities only presented around 50 weapons as an evidence against those protesters that were arrested from the sit-in. So even from government and authorities' statements and evidence provided in the court, you can see how disproportionate the use of force was, and how this was actually an indiscriminate, systematic killing that actually might amount to crimes against humanity.
Amr Bagdi from Human Rights Watch. Great to talk to you. Thank you. And as we are talking about human rights, I want to switch to Iraq, where the role of women